One of the things that is going to happen now in Washington is that we are going to start learning which senior members of the Obama administration really only wanted to serve one term. Is Hillary Clinton going to leave as Secretary of State? Is Eric Holder going to leave as Attorney General? Is Tim Geithner going to leave as Secretary of the Treasury? The speculation is now officially hot and heavy in Washington as to who will stay on, who will leave, and, of course, who will get the jobs of the people who do leave. Everybody in Washington is also now figuring out how they are going to work with President Obama for another 4 years. How the politics of him earning a second term affects what he wants to do, and how likely it is that he is going to be able to do it. It probably was not an auspicious sign for that process when the president, right after his victory speech on Tuesday night, right after he was done speaking, as soon as he was done speaking, the night he wins a second term, after he gave that speech, he got on the phone and he tried to call the Republican leader in the House and the Republican leader in the Senate. He tried to call John Boehner and Mitch McConnell, but he was told they were asleep. Quote, after his speech, Mr. Obama tried to call both Mr. Boehner and the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, but was told they were asleep. I realize it was a late night and everything, but if the president calls you and you are asleep, do you not get woken up? Isn't that sort of a standing order? One of the things we can all agree on is the sort of thing you get out of bed for. The president's on the phone. Okay, I'll wake up and take the call, no matter who you are. But no, John Boehner and Mitch McConnell stayed asleep. Nobody woke them up. So those conversations did not happen that night. Since then, both Mr. Boehner and Mr. McConnell have made statements about what they see happening in this next year, indicating that maybe they also slept through the part of the night when the results of the election came in. Mr. McConnell put out a statement saying that what's clear to him about this election is that the voters have not endorsed President Obama's first term. So the fact that the president won the election is not an endorsement of the president? Filling in a little bubble next to the man's name on a piece of paper is technically how we endorse a person in America, but Mitch McConnell does not see it that way. Taken Goddard at Political Wire was able to find online today the Romney campaign's woulda, coulda, shoulda transition website today. Surely this was not supposed to go live until Mr. Romney actually won the election, but the campaign did not wait. They presumably accidentally put it up. A transition website for a President-elect Romney, how to apply for a job with the new Romney administration and all this stuff. And it looks like, because we have seen it, because Taken Goddard screenshot it before they finally did take it down, it looks like the Romney folks had a transition motto all ready to go, a slogan. The repeated slogan on the website is smaller, simpler, smarter. When Republican Speaker of the House John Boehner gave his first post-election press conference about what he thought should happen in the country now, given the results of the election, it's almost like he thought he was speaking in the context of a President-elect Romney and President-elect Romney's smaller, simpler, smarter branded transition.
By working together and creating a fairer, simpler, cleaner tax code, moving to a fairer, simpler system, energized by a simpler, cleaner, fairer tax code.
Simpler, fairer, simpler. John Boehner at that press conference congratulated President Obama for beating Mitt Romney and then said, as a consequence of this election and to reflect the will of the country, I suggest that what we do now is enact Mitt Romney's tax plan. He said what he wants the president to do now, what he expects the president to do now, is to cut income tax rates and pay for it by closing unspecified loopholes in the tax code. If that sounds familiar, it's because that was what Mitt Romney proposed. Mitt Romney, who just lost the election after proposing that very thing. People said no. If you lose the election, you do not get to implement your ideas that the country just said no to. That's what losing means. That's the whole point, that there is a loser. We're not going to get a Mitt Romney tax policy now because Mitt Romney lost the election, John Boehner, while you were sleeping through the president's phone call. But this is how Republicans have been sort of handling the news of this election this week, at least so far. This is my handwriting. That's my actual handwriting. That's how bad my handwriting is. On the printout of a newspaper article that I read when I first got into work today. When I went back to look for the article this afternoon, I realized that that was what I had written in the margin while reading the article without really paying attention to the fact that I was doing it. I just wrote the word "ha" 5 times and then an exclamation point and a star. Here's why I did that without even noticing I was doing it. It's a quote in this New York Times article today from Oklahoma Republican Tom Cole. What does Tom Cole, Congressman Tom Cole, think about Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan losing this election? His takeaway is this. The Paul Ryan budget passed a pretty big test. We had to run around the country and defend it. The Ryan budget proved itself a viable platform on which to run and be reelected. Wow. Just to reiterate, this is what happened on election night. How does this constitute the Ryan budget passing a big test? The Ryan budget took a big test, but it did not pass that test. Those are two very different things. If the lesson of this election for Republicans appears to be, hey, all that stuff we ran on, it totally worked, think about what determines what the Republican Party does next. What determines how they fix their political problems? The question of who is going to be the new face of the Republican Party and how they're going to course correct after this disastrously bad election for them. It all depends on how they assess what just went wrong, right? And why it went so wrong. What do they think their problem is that caused the country to reject them so emphatically in 2012? The signs on how their self-assessment is going so far are not promising. On Wednesday, the day after the election, yesterday, Mr. Romney had breakfast with some of his richest donors. What does he think happened in the election? Why does he think he lost? Well, he told his donors, quote, Romney told the donors he believed Hurricane Sandy stunted his momentum in the final week of the campaign. Karl Rove wrote in the Wall Street Journal yesterday that President Obama was lucky that Hurricane Sandy happened because it, quote, interrupted Mr. Romney's momentum. This began for the Republicans even before Election Day. Republicans explaining how Mitt Romney's loss in the election would not be a reflection on anything about Mitt Romney or his policies or the campaign or the Republican Party. They were explaining that before Mr. Romney even lost. On October 31st, campaign sources told CBS News, quote, Superstorm Sandy stalled Romney's momentum. A few days before the election, Karl Rove again, quote, if you hadn't had the storm, there would have been more of a chance for the Romney campaign to talk about the deficit. The blame the storm line has continued all through today, especially with former Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour speaking on the Today Show.
Hurricane Sandy saved Barack Obama's presidency. It broke the momentum that Romney had coming in at the end of October.
This is a narrative that Republicans are telling themselves, and that the Beltway media is also now starting to tell itself because they keep hearing Republicans say it. And it is not a theory that is born from reality. I mean, this is a checkable thing, right? This is an empirical idea. Their theory here is that Mitt Romney was on track to win this thing if it weren't for that blasted storm. This is something we can check. I mean, it's easy, right? Let's start with this. We're all in agreement now that the polls were correct, right? Despite all the nonsense ahead of the election about how the polls seemed so wrong before the election, now that the election has happened, it has been proven, and we can all agree that the polls reflected math and not some nefarious agenda to make conservatives feel bad, right? So the polls were right. We can all agree. Now let's look at the polls. Out of all the polls, let's look at the one that we know now mathematically was the most accurate daily tracking poll, the one that most accurately reflected what was really going on in the race. That would be the Ipsos Reuters poll. Did Hurricane Sandy blunt Mr. Romney's momentum? Was he on track to win if it weren't for that storm? Well, Hurricane Sandy made landfall October 29th. Here's how Obama and Romney were running against each other in the most accurate poll in the country on the day before the hurricane. On the day of the hurricane, October 29th, President Obama is at 48%, Mitt Romney is at 47%. And look at the 5 days after the storm hit. Hey, again, President Obama ahead by the exact same 1%. So before Hurricane Sandy, President Obama ahead 1 or 2 points. After Hurricane Sandy, President Obama ahead by 1 or 2 points. Remember, this is the poll that we know in retrospect was totally right. So if we believe the polls, which we all do now in America, and the Ipsos Reuters poll was the most accurate one of all the polls in this presidential election, then really, provably, there was no Romney momentum going into Hurricane Sandy that was ruined by the storm. It just didn't happen, and it's checkable. And I'm not saying this to make conservatives feel bad. I'm saying this to welcome you out of the bubble of denial that has proven so dangerous to your political prospects of late. I think Haley Barbour is a smart guy. This is not a smart idea. I mean, liberals actually probably shouldn't disabuse conservatives of this notion. If you think about it, if the Republicans take as their lesson from this election that a hurricane is the only reason they didn't win, Democrats should probably be psyched about that delusion, because that means the Republicans next time will go into the next election campaigning with the same kind of candidates on the same kind of policies, but just planning on not having a hurricane. Is that going to be their plan? No storm, then we'll win. I understand why a guy like Karl Rove would tell his donors this, right? He wants to tell his donors, I didn't waste your hundreds of millions of dollars. Your hundreds of millions of dollars would have bought you a shiny new president, definitely, if it weren't for that darn storm. You definitely need to give me your hundreds of millions of dollars again, because next time there won't be a hurricane, and everything else we did was fine, and I should do it all again. That makes sense for the charlatans who make their living separating gullible rich conservatives from their money. It makes sense why a guy like Karl Rove would do that. But that is going to be the Republican Party's assessment of what happened here? It is factually untrue. You did not lose because of the storm. And this election really was an endorsement of Barack Obama. And this election did not prove the political viability of the Paul Ryan kill Medicare budget. It proved the opposite. What the Republican Party does in response to this information, whether they prove capable of absorbing this difficult information, is the next great question in the amazing politics of the American right. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Barney Frank, who represents Massachusetts' 4th District. He's the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee. Mr. Chairman, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rachel.
Since Tuesday, John Boehner has suggested that what we need to do fiscally for the country and what we should expect to happen in Washington is Mitt Romney's tax plan.
Well, the problem with that is, first, that he lost, but two, I don't know what it is, because there's a third question. It would be a mistake to assume that Mitt Romney, having said it a month ago, still supports it. You know, his public policy positions came with not good after 30 days. But Romney himself didn't tell us what it was, except he blurted out too much. He said in one of the debates, and this was incredible, well, we'll limit deductions, pick a number. What an extraordinary thing for a presidential candidate to say, pick a number. And then he said $25,000. That we would limit deductions to $25,000. Well, in our home state of Massachusetts, Rachel, if you buy a house, you're paying more than that in your mortgage interest in the first year. $2,500 is not an excessive mortgage in Massachusetts, given even today with the house prices. So that takes away the middle class deductions for home ownership, for education, for health care. But we literally don't know what the Romney plan is. The other thing we ought to say when they say this is an endorsement of their principles, remember, too, that the Romney plan was only for about a month. That plan. It was before that to reduce taxes for the rich. And when we talk about who did what, to the extent that Romney started to make some gains, and he did make some gains from the dismal position he was in, he did it by abandoning his positions. One other point that by the way, I did want to note, you and I have this interest, I did want to ask the Romney people, smaller, simpler, smarter, except the military.
Right.
The biggest single area of expenditure in the federal government, smaller, simpler, smarter. This is a guy who thinks we have to have more of the World War I ships. I don't know how that fits with smaller. Well, they were simpler. They weren't smaller and smarter.
Right.
But the other thing is this. If we look at the election, we didn't just elect the president. We elected a Senate and a House. The Democrats, despite all predictions, picked up seats in the Senate. And the way they worked, these were more Republican states than ours. Were people voting for Democrats in Montana and Indiana and Wisconsin and elsewhere because of the storm? I mean, do the people of those Midwestern states say, well, you know what, Obama did a good job of the storm, let's re-elect our senator? And by the way, in the House, we gained House seats. Unfortunately, the Republicans were able to gerrymander the House badly because they won the 2010 election. If we had run this House election by the same districts that had existed in 2010, we'd have a Democratic House now. Wow. And we did very well in the Democratic Senate. So this was a very big victory, nearly 3 million in the popular vote, the 5th time in the last 6 that the Democrats have won the popular vote. And no, as far as Mitt Romney's tax plan, one, we don't know what it is. He was afraid to tell us what it is because it would have some voodoo effect. And the public did repudiate it.
The president has been quiet mostly since his victory speech. He gave his victory speech. The campaign today released tape of him speaking to his volunteers. We know he's going to speak on the economy tomorrow. But even in that little bit that we've heard from the president, we've heard some, at least gesturing towards stuff that he might want to get done in his second term and might want to try to start with in his second term. Obviously, we're expecting something in terms of economic policy, immigration, climate change, maybe something in terms of election, the conduct of elections and reforming that process. With more Democrats in the Senate and with, I think, Democrats picking up seats in the House, too, despite all those things that you just said, what do you think is going to be possible?
Well, that's a good point. But can you just say one other thing that you reminded me of when you mentioned climate change? Yeah, the storm did help the president. My God, the man did his job very well, much better than his Republican predecessor. And, oh, that's cheating. That shouldn't have counted. But climate change was relevant. It brought up the endorsement of Mike Bloomberg. Because one of the things the storm did was to bring climate change to the fore. So to that extent, if the Republicans got hurt because of the storm, it was because of the abysmal stupidity of their position denying any climate change. And yes, so the storm did remind people how wrong they were. I think there's this question. The Senate, I hope, and the President will come up with a balanced plan. Substantial cuts in the military, and that's one we won. Romney tried to make that an issue, and the President stood for the first time a president campaigned on less military spending in my memory, maybe in my lifetime, and it was successful.
You won Virginia with that message.
Yeah, exactly.
Heavily military state, right?
And secondly, you get some tax increases on the very wealthy, which showed to be popular. And Romney ran away from cutting their taxes. And yeah, there'll be some domestic spending restraints, not raising the retirement age and Social Security. One of the reasons I'm glad I'm not running again is when I tell people, I don't think a woman who started waiting on tables at 18 and is still carrying heavy dishes in and out of a hot kitchen when she's 66, I don't think she ought to have to work another 5 years. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a politician, because I ain't one anymore. But it depends. There are clearly some Republicans with a sense of survival and who understand that you've got to have some revenue increases on the wealthy, military cuts, and spending restraints elsewhere. And the question is, will any of them break with the party? That's really it, because what we have to say to Republicans, look, do you now not understand what happens when you let crazy people win your primaries? I mean, I don't know if I've ever showed you my bumper sticker, which I actually made up, because I know some of our friends, ourselves, we think the president could do a little more in some areas. But I made up a bumper sticker that said, vote Democratic, we're not perfect, but they're nuts. And maybe now the answer is, well, the Dick Lugars, the ones that remain in the Republican Party, not liberals, they're not left. The mainstream conservatives finally say to the leadership, you know what, this is crazy, and we're going to vote for a balanced plan. And I think that's the issue. They understand that the right wing got repudiated this time, and the Democratic position won in the Senate and in the White House, and even in the House, given the gerrymander. And so I don't know the answer, but it's possible that you will have some mainstream Republicans with some common sense and a survival instinct who will break with the crazy.
It's going to be amazing to watch that dialogue happen, given what didn't happen after the McCain.
Oh, I have enjoyed watching Fox News for the first time in my memory.
Let me ask you one brief question about your own future. I know that you just said you're psyched you're not running again for your House seat. If John Kerry, the senior senator from Massachusetts, or Deval Patrick, the state's governor, takes a cabinet job in this administration, would you make yourself available for the governorship or the Senate seat in Massachusetts?
No, it's flattering for people mentioned. One, the Senate seat. I'm 72 years old, Rachel. I don't know. Others may think this. I don't think at 72 you commit yourself to a 6-year term. I mean, I hope I'll be very healthy, and Jim certainly keeps me healthy. But no, I want to write. I want to be involved in the debate without having to march in parades, to be honest, and without having people scream when I say through this, "Oh, you're just a politician." I'm very happy, splitting my time between Jim's in my house in Maine and the apartment we'll get and do some teaching, and I want to be a participant in the public debate with a little less responsibility.
Well, I expect to be talking to you at this table when you're 150. So, Sir Barney Frank, thank you very much for being here, sir. All right, things we learned this week. Women voters have their own ideas. That's coming up next.